Okay, it's recording. Hello, YouTube family. This is Alex here from Van Ganta House German Shepherd, and today we have a very special guest. Say hello to Jim from Jordy's Shorty Jacks. Jim and I have been talking for a while about genetics, and there are a lot of videos on genetics on my channel. Today we're going to combine a lot of those videos into one master class. So we hope you enjoy it. Jim, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell the people your website, your Facebook or Instagram, and how to contact you.
Oh, you can go to shortyjacks.com. That's what we're at. We breed short Jack Russells. My name's Jim.
Where are you based out of, Jim? What state are you in?
North Texas.
Texas, huh?
Yes.
Largest state in the union, huh?
Not as cold as
could be a country.
Not as cold as New Jersey.
That's true. But we're having flooding here because of all the rain.
Oh man.
Yeah. Jim, so you're breeding Jack Russell's Terriers. Tell the audience a little bit about what got started in the breed. What characteristics you're looking for? Do you have show dogs, hunting dogs? A terrier from Latin means terra firma, terra, which is earth. So the word terrier was originally meant go to the ground or a ratter. That was what terriers were originally for. Do you breed pet quality dogs? Do you breed dogs which have working drives? Tell the audience a little bit about your breeding program and the kind of dogs you produce.
We produce performance, short Jack Russells, the 10 to 12 inch dogs, below 12, the short ones, performance companion dogs.
Perfect. Is there, I don't think there is, but I'm not an expert in the breed. Is there a difference between the wire coat terrier and the smooth coat terrier that you can tell the audience?
Some have long coat. There's three types. Smooth coat, that's what we breed, classic smooth coat. And then there's a broken coat and a rough coat. Other than that.
Okay, but there's no performance difference from a performance point of view, just a coat difference, right?
You know, breed that out of them. The prey drive and working abilities is hard to breed out of them. That's what they were developed to do. But you know, certain practices and breedings, like towards the show ring, depending, you know, can bring a different result than what you bring out of those dogs' abilities.
Right. I found that the show breeding, in many cases, has ruined a lot of working breeds, including the German Shepherd. The show dogs are supposedly bred for conformation, but they're bred for an exaggerated structure where the dog gaits, where that exaggerated gait around the show ring, gating around, and no working ability is tested, and it destroying many breeds.
You know,
how do you feel about that?
You know, they're beautiful. You know, it's beautiful to see them putting on the performance. You know, conformation is important.
Right.
To all breeds, you know, and they're focused on that. And if that's their goals, you know, there's no issues that I have with that. You know, actual issues. It's just whatever someone's goals are that they're working towards. Now, performance side of it, you know, they have sometimes they're not as focused on the conformation as they are the actual work. You know, if they're actually working them, you know, and it's hard to do in certain areas of the United States, depending on your environment of what you're actually working them for. It's not like it used to be back in the old days where people were avid hunters and taking them out, you know, and we test ours on our property for what's in our environment.
So they go to ground for gophers and stuff like that? Is that what it is? Yeah,
little gopher rats, and snakes, squirrels, awesome. You know,
I'm glad
any kind of bark shows up.
I'm personally glad to meet a person that is breeding true to the purpose of the breed, because a lot of people have forgotten that our breeds came with a purpose. Before we begin today's topic, I just want to mention two things that I would ask the audience to do. We get like 20,000 views on one of our videos, sometimes 40,000 views, but we may only get like 50 subscribers. It doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps us out. Please, if you like this video and you find it brings you value, please subscribe to our channel. That's all we ask of you. It's completely free. We're going to give you a lot of value in terms of genetics and our combined experience. But please subscribe to Von House and Jim when you see him on his channel. Please subscribe to his channel if you're a terrier man and you like terriers or you like genetics, period. Just support the people who support the breeding community. Support us so we can support you. The other thing I would ask this audience to do is that support our sponsors. By supporting our sponsors, you're supporting us. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly, and I hope this will help the audience. One second, let me do that. As you can see, we have new vitamins on our screen, and I'm a distributor. The DS formula in particular, if you have a large breed like a German Shepherd or a Malinois or a Dutch Shepherd or a Great Dane, which is a very large breed, or you have a Mastiff, you need joint support. And I wouldn't recommend something and put my name something if it doesn't really something that I do. I don't put my name on something lightly. So guys, visit this website, put the code which will appear in the video below. I think I will put it in the below, and buy these vitamins. This is going to do a world of good for your pet. So support the people that are bringing you good content, and do us that favor. Your dog will benefit, and we will benefit. Please support our channel and channels like ours by visiting the people who are our sponsors. Okay. With that being said, and gotten out of the way, the per you got to do a little plug there.
Hey,
Otherwise,
that's great. I'd just like to add that, hey, this is about sharing information, experiences, that everybody has. And there's a lot of different ways to do things. So we're not saying your way is not, this isn't the only ways to do things. There's a lot of ways to get to where we're going with all this stuff. We just want
that's
to
right.
share, to entice people to do their research. You don't have to listen to what
That's
I'm
right.
saying is the end all be all or anybody else, but you should go and research it for yourself. It just betters your program for yourself.
Absolutely. Don't listen to us. We're not going to tell you what to do or not to do. We're going to give you information.
Yes, sir.
And that information came from books, came from seeing dogs, came from practical experience. A lot of the information we'll give you is not different from what other breeders will give you. But we're here to talk about genetics and how it impacts performance, and how to develop a line. There are a lot of videos on my channel. There's a playlist regarding genetics. I have many of you have seen me on Joe's channel, NWA Connie Corso. Some of you have seen me on the Raul's channel, QBN channel. Uh, there are a lot of videos on genetics on my channel. With Jordan today, with Jim from Jordan Shorty Jacks.
Hey,
Gonna, I miss said it.
I think the first thing we're going to get to is the prepotency, if it matters, right?
We're gonna matter prepotency of why it matters. So without further ado, let me share a screen. Bear with me, and I'm gonna bring up some points, then go to Jim. Bring up some points and go to Jim. Okay, that's how we're gonna do. We're gonna do it. Okay.
And then I'm going to flip it
So
back on. I think you're going to put it
yeah,
all on me. Let's do it.
that's it. Yep. So let me see. Bear with me, guys, as I share the right screen because I have a lot of.
Alex, you don't even have a bear in the room with you. What do you mean?
Okay. So one of the first thing we're gonna do, I'm gonna just bring up something which already I have opened, and I'm gonna go over that. Does everybody see this screen? Master Breeders Chihuahua. Does everybody see this screen
I can
or
see it
not
on
yet?
my.
Okay, good. Then the
Yeah.
audience can see it too. So this web article, it'll be here in the description. Chihuahua World, jimdofree.com. I'm gonna put a link in the description. These are the actual articles written by Lloyd Bracket, not like somebody explaining it to you, but these are the actual words as written by the man in 1960. He took all of his knowledge and more than 15 years of breeding, and from 1946 until 1936 until 1960, put all of his knowledge into this article. Now, line breeding is family breeding. So people say, well, isn't line breeding and inbreeding the same thing? The answer is no. Line breeding and inbreeding is not the same thing because, let me stop sharing that for a moment. Okay, everybody see my face again because I just stopped sharing for a moment. Um, line breeding and inbreeding is not the same thing because when you're inbreeding and the immediate family itself. So father to daughter, full siblings, half siblings, mother to son. Um, these are examples of inbreeding. Now, why would you inbreed? If you're starting a new breed, let's say you're starting a breed called the German Shepherd, and it is now 1899, not 2025, you would breed the best dog you could find. Has to be a high quality dog, which is disease free and a good, example of what your breed type will be. So in the German Shepherd, it was Horrid von Graffith. That was the first German Shepherd. Um, I don't know in Jim's case in terms of uh, terriers, but it's the same concept. You take the ideal dog, you breed it to 4 or 5 of his daughters. Why so many? Because some of them may not turn out. Some will carry forward his characteristics and some will not. So when you're breeding animals, it's not a certain thing that that dog will pass. It may pass through one daughter and may not pass through another daughter through something called gene recombination. And you would inbreed to start off the breed because you're increasing what is called prepotency. You're increasing the ability of that sire to pass himself. I just said a mouthful. I said gene recombination. Let's talk
That's
about.
right.
Go ahead, Jim.
That's right. Once they crossed out crossing with other breeds to develop a type of dog, then they line breed
Right.
to
After
get the
that,
good
right.
characteristics ready to fine tune the dog.
Correct.
Or the
You first
characteristics.
create the breed by inbreeding, and then you line breed not to create congenital defects from breeding so closely. So initially you inbreed, but then later on, as the population size increases, then you line breed. That's a good point, Jim. That's a very important point.
Back in
Now,
the older days, what they do that they didn't have like now we have testing to help with a lot of those genetic uh,
diseases, right?
diseases and stuff, and it they didn't have it back then, so they had to develop a better eye over time, over
Right.
generations. If they got the information back from their buddy's dog or fellow hunter's dog or a relative, a dog that they put with a relative, if they got that information back or they saw something affect the animal, then they could back up and be like, okay, these dogs were caused to be affected by a disease that they didn't know they had. But now we have
Correct.
tests.
So, correct. Uh, so basically, inbreeding. Just to clarify, inbreeding itself does not cause disease. If you go to your local vet, he'll tell you, don't inbreed, don't inbreed, it causes disease. Inbreeding does not, I repeat, does not cause disease.
It's already in.
In-
It's already in the
It's
population.
already in the it's already in the population and in the genes, okay? Just as easily you can have an uninbred dog and it also could have a disease. Inbreeding by itself does not cause disease. What inbreeding does is it breeds the disease genes to the surface. It
Where you
doesn't cause the disease. In other words, let's say you have a capital B and a lowercase b, B uppercase being the dominant gene, lowercase b being the recessive gene, and it meets up with another partner, which is also a dominant B and a lowercase b. We're talking about one gene out of hundreds of, out of a lot of genes. Now, you're going to have four combinations: two capital B's, two upper and lowercase b's, and then another combination would be the two lowercase b's. The two lowercase b's are the recessive genes. When they combine, if that happens to be a disease-based gene, now you have two copies of it from both sides. So
That's
it's
right.
not that the inbreeding caused the disease, is that the dominant gene is in front of the disease. See, this is the recessive. The dominant is in front of it. It's called dominant. It masks the recessive. Now, when you remove the dominant, the recessive is right here, combined with another recessive, and now you have disease. In other words, it's not the disease, is this disease is already there. You're simply combining two recessive traits which carry that disease, creating a carrier to another carrier. Now you have a double copy, and that's what causes the disease.
And
It's not
while
that
it's
the in
outcrossing allows it to be covered up and passed on as a carrier, and you don't know. And if people aren't testing, or they don't know that the dog has one of the parents have a copy, and they're like, "Oh,
correct,
I want to breed this dog," and they've acquired another one, not tested, and they breed them together. And like, oh, when they have some affected, you know, by having two copies, uh,
right,
to find out the hard way, or now there's testing, they test and be like, oh wow, okay, you know, a certain percentage, because it depends on those alleles lining up. When it says 25% of your puppies can be affected, it's not 1 out of 4. It's 25% chance that that litter can be affected. You know,
right.
none of the numbers are like concrete.
It's not that the number will be a quarter of the litter. It's that 25% of the total may have the disease.
That's right.
It's a statistical game of chance, basically. Now, what people need to understand is, then you're saying, well, given this danger of disease, then why do it at all? Why do it at all? Well, the answer is that if you outcross all the time and you scatter breed, you can't create a breed. That's the problem. You can't create a breed at all. Number one. Number two, once you have a breed, to perpetuate some outstanding individuals, you have to line breed to perpetuate that individual, because the only way to perpetuate him is to have as much of his genes and his offspring that you can carry forward. And
It's the
every
only
time you breed, you have half of his
way you're gonna
genes.
know. It's the only way you're gonna know that you have it is through line breeding, to
Right.
bring it to the surface where you can see it, and then you go forward with the litter with a
Understanding. Correct. In
clear
fact,
understanding
right.
puppy that is clear of the disease, to better the breed and get it disease free.
Correct. Because now you can eliminate the carriers, which have a double copy, from your gene pool. And then what remains is therefore stronger, not weaker. Now, you can't keep inbreeding without loss of fertility and hybrid vigor. So there's a limit to it. There's a limit of how far you can go and how many generations you can go before you see a disease. So you just can't keep inbreeding and inbreeding and inbreeding. You are not understanding that autosomal gene recombination will not save you. What do I mean by that? Let's define that term, because it's a factor in breeding any animal, any mammal for that matter, or any animal. Imagine in your mind's eye two decks of cards. Each deck is 52 cards. There's a red deck and a black deck, just for the sake of this explanation. You took 26 cards from the black deck and you put it on the side. You took 26 cards from the red deck, you put it on the side. Those two decks are from the mother and father. The red deck is the father and the black deck is the mother. The 26 cards you set on the side from each deck, you combine those two, half of those two, and those are the 50% of the genes across all siblings in that litter. That's the base that all of them will get. Okay, that initial 50%. Now, the other 26 cards that are not on the side, but in your hands, you're shuffling them, right? If they're homogeneous, you're going to take a red jack out of this deck and you'll pair it with a red jack from the other deck. You'll take a queen from this deck, a queen of spades, and you'll pair it with a queen of spades from the other deck. You'll take king of hearts from this deck and you'll match it with a king of hearts from that deck. In other words, this is what homogeneous means. You're taking the same playing card and you
Allelic
match
frequency.
uh, allelic frequencies for recessives. And I'm
Right.
just describing
Okay.
homogeneous genes in general. Now, allelic frequency is that there are two, when you're line breeding, you have to have the same parent, usually a grandparent or great grandparent, on both the top and bottom of the pedigree. Now, there's two processes in play. If the gene is dominant, you're going to create prepotency. What does prepotency mean? It means the ability to pass yourself to your
That's
offspring. You're going to have some traits which are dominant and some traits which are recessive. In a prepotent animal, the dominant traits pass. But if you have enough common ancestors in your pedigree, then the recessive pass too because you're repeating them frequently, and that's called allelic frequency. It's the allelic frequency of
right.
repetitive recessive traits. Jim, you wanted to add to that a little bit and explain it a little further to people?
No, it's the ability to pass its good traits and characteristics for what someone likes in their breed. If they have a certain look, or you're trying to better things, trying to do it just off of phenotype, you can do that. You have to know all the grandparents, the parents of that dog, and how was their performance, how is their health, how is all that stuff, because you got to start with a good you're after, and better it from there. Because when you start trying to, you don't want to make a inferior
A mess. Right.
dog
Right.
homozygous, and then
No.
it's working backwards.
Correct. That's a very important point. The most important point that I want the viewer who's an aspiring breeder to take away from this video is the reason you don't want to line breed or inbreed, and I recommend it be not done by most people. I recommend it not be done. I suggest you outcross and you're safe. The reason I say that is because most people are lazy. Most people breed what's in front of them. Most people don't take the time to research pedigrees. I've spoken with people who couldn't name a single grandparent of their own dog. Not one grandparent. Most people don't know how to read a pedigree. They don't know their dog's the grandparents' names. They don't know what characteristics they carry. They don't know what characteristics they want. You have to have a goal, guys. You have to have a vision of what you want. So if you don't know where your goal is and you don't know where you're going and you don't know anything about genetics and you don't know anything about anything, in my opinion,
Most
you're
of them
not.
do. Most of them do know. Okay, well, the parents, they're 50%, and they're like, oh, they get all of the genetic value
No,
from the
they
male.
no, they don't. No, they
You know,
don't. Right.
because you would have a 200% dog, and that's not going to happen. So
Correct.
you get a haploid and a haploid, so you get 50% from him and
You have a
50%.
haploid and a haploid, right? But then it's not the same combination every time. In other
No,
words,
even per puppy or per litter,
correct.
if it's no homozygosity.
Right. And not only that, but you don't get 50-50 from each parent. One child may look more like the father, and that one child may be 60-40. In other words, 60% the father's genes, only 40% the mother's genes. So on
When you
paper,
hear
they're
the
all
percentage,
50-50.
when you hear the percentages, Alex, when they're like, "Oh, the parents is 50%, 50%," so this puppy, you know, he's got 50%. Well, he might have had more of one than the litter mate. Okay, it's not
Right.
going to be, oh, it's 50%. Oh, my dog comes into heat every 6 months on this day. It could be a little earlier, it could be later. Nothing is concrete with the numbers and the
That's
percentages.
right. This is
So
nature, guys.
it
This is Mother
varies
Nature.
from puppy
Exactly.
to puppy, from dog to dog.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I'm trying to explain to you guys is that take you and your brother, human beings, forget about dogs for a second. You are not your brother's genetic clone. You don't look exactly alike.
I look way
One,
better.
no.
He's going to disagree with me.
Okay. My brother and I don't really look alike. So, so a littermate is not a clone. That's a twin. They have some genes in common because they have the same parents, but they have a lot of other genes which they're only 50% related to each other. In other words, they're not really, and half siblings are only a quarter related to each other.
Approximately. It could
And
be
this is approximately
more
right.
or a little less,
Right.
or
Exactly. And
depends
not
on
only
what
that,
the gene recombination is like a part that's uncontrollable.
it's like a complete shuffling of cards, and you don't know how it's going to shuffle.
A
Exactly.
52 card deck, like you were saying.
Exactly. And I'm using 52 because that's just a convenient way. But
That's how many's in the deck.
it,
If they're not in there,
it's
somebody's not.
78 in a dog. Two are sex chromosomes. The other ones are not 76. So imagine having two decks of cards which are 76 chromosomes versus 52. It becomes even a bigger shuffle.
You mean like
So
alpha? all of these different genetics.
Say it one more time. I didn't hear
All
you.
these different genetics by
Right,
outcrossing.
different. Right. It's a plus. There's a plasticity in the genome. It's not exactly going to happen every way at the same time. What you have to understand is you're taking an animal that was created by nature, which is the wolf, and you've modified it through time, and it became domesticated. And then once it became domesticated, you started creating breeds with floppy ears, long ears, whatever you happen to like, to suit your needs. But that happened through phenotype matching. In other words, if two dogs look similar, they both have floppy ears, and you breed them together, that's how you initially start creating a type. But once you create a type, you have to create the ability to pass that type forward. That's
But
when you start line breeding and inbreeding.
Alex, I want to poke at you a little bit because
Go ahead.
how it worked with my breed was, it went the wolf into a Jack Russell, and then I think they developed the German Shepherd from the Jack
Okay. Okay. If you say so. I don't agree with you, but that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. So, what I wanted to give the viewer is the idea of a genetic payload. Imagine you have a jet aircraft on a surface to air. In other words, it's not going to fight other planes, it's going to do ground targets, right? And that F-15, F-14 jet is carrying Sparrow missiles. Uh, um, what are the other kinds of missiles, Jim? Sparrows,
Air, they're doing
air
back,
to surface missiles, multiple kinds of missiles, right? Now,
but they're not
it's
going to have to torpedo under the water.
right, right. So it can that plane has attachment points for different kinds of munitions, right? Sparrows, air to air missiles, air to surface missiles, air to ship missiles, right?
Tomahawk
Now,
missile.
Tomahawk missiles, right? Now that airplane is flying and it's going to hit the Iraqi tanks with a tank missile that can penetrate a tank armor, right? Then next target it hits is going to be artillery. It's going to hit an artillery and munitions, right? And next time it flies, it's going to hit a radar installation station. Now, that plane had multiple kinds of missiles specific to each job to hit that target.
As
Same
compared
thing,
to the
same thing, right. Those missiles are a payload. They're called a weapons payload.
right.
Now, think of your genes as a gene payload. The payload of genes from that sperm and that egg meeting are a different payload every time it combines during mitosis. In other words, this egg combines with this sperm. This sperm is a specific genetic payload from the father at that moment of time, and this egg is a specific genetic payload from the mother at that time. Then the next sperm hits with this egg, it's a
That's right.
different genetic payload. Then this sperm hits with this egg, it's a different genetic payload. So some puppies get the genetic payload where the father's influence is greater. Like some kids look more like their dad than their mom, and then vice versa. Some kids look more their mom than their dad. Same thing happens in
That's right.
dogs. So the way to think of gene recombination is you have a weapons payload like in an aircraft shooting down targets. It has a different weapon payload per target type. I'm just explaining it from a military analogy
That's right.
point of view. So think of the genes as a genetic payload, and there's a different payload every time it hits. That's
That's
how
right.
you think of gene recombination during mitosis.
That's right.
Th-
The only way that they're 100% the same payload is if they have the same egg and the same sperm.
If the same sperm fertilizes two eggs at the same time, then you have a twin. Then it's the exact same combination. That's right. Right. Now, so what are you trying to do with line breeding? You're trying to create genes which will recombine because they're exactly the same on both sides. That's what you're trying to do. And when the genes are the same, the characteristics you have are the same. The
Right.
question, however, becomes at which point is it safe to do, and at which point you've approached the danger zone? Where are you where the line breeding or inbreeding will cause genetic defects? And where are you where it'll not cause any defects because the relative is 5 generations in the past, but you're not going to get the benefit of what you're trying to accomplish either. In other words, that's called tight line breeding and loose line breeding. So let's define that a little bit, Jim. Can you tell the audience what some
You
of
know,
the
yeah.
distances and generations that will affect close and distant line breeding?
Well, you know, I acquired dogs that had, because the dogs I was trying to acquire from that I was interested in moving forward with, they were dead or there were no offspring directly off of them. So uh, I was trying to accumulate some prospects to where when I combined them, I could increase, the blood
Homogeneous genes, right?
a little tighter to bring it back forward. And I didn't know what it was called. Then I seen one of your videos. And I was like,
Oh, okay.
back massing. I'm like,
Backmassing,
I
right?
didn't even
Yeah,
know what I was doing, but I knew that's what I needed to do.
right.
And then I heard you saying I'm back massing. Then you look under, like, you almost can't find back massing anywhere. It's a,
No,
mm,
nobody explains it. Let me take you guys on a PowerPoint I want to share with the audience because let me see if I can share this correctly. Give me a second, guys. I'm not that fast with it, so give me a second to share the screen. Slides and
but,
PDF.
as far as answering the rest of the question while you're doing that, even with if you're breeding within your breed, it technically is there. It's all inbreeding. It's just from almost to none, but it's still within the same breed. So going back and back and back, they're still related. They just don't have any effect on coming forward to add any kind of prepotency or a relationship, blood,
Right,
family wise.
correct. Does everybody see this screen? I don't know if everybody sees it.
They could see.
The importance of prepotent dogs. Okay.
That's right.
So in order to create a breed and pass forward, you had to have a concept called prepotency. Now, let me explain that for a second. So what is prepotency? Every breeder, I'm going to read it because why not? Every breeder I know shows and understands the importance of a great sire, and this is particularly true for those dogs to a large extent stamp their likeness on their offspring. While a bitch of having qualities highly prized, a sire can easily be more far-reaching on his impact because a stud dog can be bred to many females. That's why a sire is usually what you're trying to make prepotent. You could
But
make a bitch prepotent,
you
but
could
you
do both.
usually want to. You could do both,
Yeah.
but most line breeding is done on the male side, although both are equally valid. But historically, people try to make the sire prepotent because he can have sex with a lot of females and create himself in a
Well,
lot of offspring.
let me ask you on that because
Yeah.
a lot of people they say breeders and stuff when you're communicating. A lot of people want to they say to start your program with a female. Well, a female worth starting with you would think would be more valuable, a prepotent female. Well, what do you think about that?
Well, a female is where you start a breeding program, but first of all, let's step back. The first question is how many dogs do you need to start line breeding? The answer is it's not two.
No.
People think, well, I can start breeding and I create line breeding through two dogs. No, you can't.
You get
You need,
boxed in.
you need about five dogs to create a breeding program, minimum. So to create a breeding program where you're doing line breeding, you need about five dogs. So let's start off with that statement out front. The next statement that people need to understand before we talk about males and females, and I answer your question, Jim, is that what's your time frame? If your time frame is to make a quick buck and you're looking at breeding as a hustle and you want to make money quick and you're not looking at this as a long-term investment of your time and effort, that this conversation is not for you. This whole video is not for you because this is a time-consuming process. To create a line takes at least 4 generations. If you breed at age 2, not earlier, which is unethical to breed before age 2, you're going to take 8 years because 2 is the first one, the next one is 2, the next one is 2. In other words, so we're looking at a 6 to 8 year process before you create a line. It's not ethical to breed a 1 year old dog. If somebody's breeding a 1 year old dog or breeding a dog on her first heat cycle, they're not ethical because what are you in a rush, man? You have to do right by the dogs. You have to do right by the dogs. It's all about the dogs. It's all about being ethical to the animals. You're responsible for living things. You have to be fair to the dogs.
Well,
I,
the thing, Alex, is just as important it is if you're going to line breed to know the percentages and the COI and CORs going
yeah,
forward. It's using the phenotype of the
Right.
characteristics, controlling the temperament is all in using
Yeah.
those genetic
You-
information. But at the same time, it's going to be, if you're constantly breeding non-related family member dogs, it's just as important to be able to read your pedigree to know that you're not, if you're not trying to.
Correct. So to answer your question, whether a female or not, the answer is that there's something called mitochondrial DNA. So the way it happens is DNA is passed around through what's called RNA, ribonucleic acid, through what's called a messenger DNA, and then it becomes a series of proteins which encode a gene sequence. I'm not going to get into the
That's right. Yeah.
complexity of how this works, but basically RNA is the carrier. Uh, think of it like DNA is a language with each chromosome having musical notes, right? So to have a language, you had to have a creator to create a language. So not to get into religion, but there had to be a God in order to create DNA because DNA is a language. And to have a language, you have to have a language maker. But basically, DNA is passed through RNA. It's a complex process. I'm not going to get into a biology class. But what the female does is not only does she pass through autosomal chromosomes, meaning the chromosomes which are the ordinary chromosomes, through gene recombination that I just described, but then there's another path of inheritance called sex-linked chromosomes. And that's another topic. We're going to get into that. Let me just cover some of these main points and then we'll swing back to that. So now, uh, so what is the advantages? The significant advantage of line breeding over ordinary inbreeding is that while it increases homozygosity and prepotency, the homozygous produced line breeding is more apt to be desired traits than the case of undirected inbreeding. I'm going to explain that in a second. Line breeding tends to separate the breed into distinct families, each closely related to some admired ancestor between which effective selection can be practiced. So let's talk about that. If you're inbreeding, you can close the gene pool very quickly. You can create a prepotent animal in as little as one generation. Yeah, if you breed a father to his own daughter, which is inbreeding, you're creating a prepotent animal instantly. Or
That's
if you
right.
breed half siblings to each other from the same father with two different females, the father is 50%, each mother is 25% each. 25 plus 25 plus 50 is 100%. So in a generation, you've created a prepotent dog. Or you take the half siblings to each other and breed back to their father, which is at this point their grandfather from the next set of kids. You've passed him essentially. The animals which come out are 75% him. Now,
75%. Or use the brother instead of
or
going
you
back.
or you could use his brother and they're
30.
37.5% him. Right. The bottom line is that inbreeding can close a gene pool very quickly. Line breeding doesn't take 2 years, it takes 8 years. Now, if your time frame is short, you're going to inbreed. If your time frame is long, you're going to line breed. And if you're in this game for the long haul, you're going to line breed. You're not going to inbreed. Now, the advantage of line breeding is that you have a chance to correct mistakes because you see, as you close a gene pool, you reduce the ability of the gene pool to respond to disease. So the ability to respond to a disease, which is because you have so few traits from so few shared ancestors, the gene pool cannot adjust to a disease quickly and adapt. So inbreeding closes the gene pool quick. You get the result, but it's quick.
That's
Line
right.
breeding takes time and you have to select the best individuals because it's not the inbreeding or line breeding that does the magic. It's selecting the right individuals which carry those traits, which also happen to be related.
Can't
That
do
is
it just
that is
saying
you can't right. You can't say, well, these dogs are related to each other and therefore I have accomplished my goal. No,
on
you
top
haven't.
of that, you have to take and okay, for example, when you're line breeding, you're dragging. If you're line breeding on a male, you're also the females that they were bred through on the side that you're not focusing on. You
Right.
know, you're bringing that in there, and that helps to slow down the the issues unless those females also, like when you're figuring out a COI
Right.
and you're focused on the male and you're like, oh, okay, he's this much, and you're not paying attention to the female. If that female's in there two or three different times, now you're
That's
bringing it
right.
on
Right. You're not
genetics.
line breeding on one ancestor, usually because
COI goes higher.
right. You're line breeding usually on several animals. I'm going to show a couple of sample pedigrees a little later. But for the sake of the audience who may not understand this fully at this point, we're going to just talk about one individual for the sake of simplicity.
That's
Then we're
right.
going to circle to real life scenario in a moment. But the point I'm wanting to make about this slide is that it's a process. It takes time. Whereas if you inbreeding, it doesn't take any time at all. And people confuse inbreeding and line breeding as being the exact same thing. They refer to the two interchangeably. It's not. Line breeding is a much milder version of inbreeding.
Aunt to nephew, uncle to niece, maybe
Right.
have
Half
sister,
uncle to niece, half great
grandfather,
grand. Right.
daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
They're
And then
not as tight.
if you're doing uh, father, daughter, mother, son, brother,
That's
sister,
inbreeding. That's
that's
inbreeding. Right.
that's tight as it gets.
Right. So by tight, what do I mean by tight? So I'm going to explain the word tight in a second. So tight would be the generation distance. So it's, let's say three generations back on both sides, double bred and a common grandparent. That's first cousins. That's tight for line breeding. Then 4 double bred in the fourth generation or on a common great grandparent. That's not tight.
Well, see,
Five
that's
five.
yeah.
Yeah. In other words, these are all line breeding, but as you go back in time, the genetic influence of the common ancestor decreases. So why
But
is this relevant?
harder. It's harder to when you're trying to back mass. It's harder to even get to a level because through the genetic labs with information that they've done through their studies that you have to be a 5 COI
Right.
or greater to be homozygous that you can pass itself. And when you get over 10, now when you start seeing a few little issues. So even when you're doing what we would consider light line breeding or
Right.
mild line breeding as compared to inbreeding, it's harder to obtain it than you think.
Correct. So that's the point Jim is making. So if you notice this screen, we have a Hereford bull, which is a cow. Notice this is bred to be excellent for milk production and dairy production. If you find a bull in nature or an ox, it doesn't look like this. This fantastic looking horse is a Lipizzere stallion. It's gorgeous. It was a Spanish riding horse during the times when people used cavalry. We didn't have mechanized war. People fought wars on horses. For hundreds and hundreds of centuries, people fought war on horses. This was a battle horse. This was a cold-blooded horse and a hot-blooded horse mixed together. And you see these beautiful animals in front of you, this beautiful stallion and this beautiful bull. These are the products of selective breeding. So without selective breeding, these gorgeous type of animals, not just dogs, but horses, cows, could not have been accomplished. So let's talk about one more time, and then I'll amplify Jim's point. He made a very good point. So line breeding versus inbreeding. There's an ancestor in common on both the male and female side. They're not directly related to other ancestors in the pedigree, only that one ancestor. The dog must show type and be worthy of line breeding. That means that you're not going to line breed crappy dogs. You must select the creme de la creme and only then you want to line breed. In other words, if
That's
you're
right.
line breeding, you're not, the mechanism of line breeding doesn't do the magic. If you're breeding crappy dog A to crappy dog B, the fact that they're first cousins doesn't matter. Their grandfather could have been a superior dog, but these two first cousins, which share the same grandpapa, are crappy examples, and therefore the fact that you're line breeding doesn't matter. So line breeding involves not just the magic of the relationship, but the magic of selection. All right, dogs must require 6 to 10 years to accomplish. Okay, versus inbreeding requires very little time to accomplish. Now, inbreeding quickly closes the gene pool, and therefore any possible resistance to disease quickly accomplishes prepotency, but locks in both good and bad traits without a chance for correction over several generations. Can be done as only as little as 2 years. Now, so what we're saying here is line breeding, because you have time, you can refine your traits, refine them until you get the type of dog which is your ideal of that breed. Whereas inbreeding, because you're doing it so quickly, you're closing the gene pool, You don't have time to refine the animal to do what you want it to be. It's boom, it's instantly that dog is accomplished, but it may not be the ideal outcome. It's just simply an inbred dog, but
That's
you
right.
don't have time to refine it. Now, what Jim was saying earlier for the audience, which um, may not be as familiar with some of these terms, because we're throwing these words at you loose and fast because we're both so familiar with it and we're both so efficient at speaking at it, but some of the audience members may not follow it. What Jim is saying is that if your COI is 6.25%, which is typical for first cousins, it is considered high enough to create prepotency. But if you have 12.5, which is half siblings, it's extremely high. It will create prepotency, but the chance for disease is higher. So that middle sweet spot between 12.5 and 6.25 is where you want to play. So around 10%, which is uncle to niece matings, is that it's lower than 12, but higher than 6.25, but it is powerful enough to create prepotency.
Well,
Whereas
you know
any
what you do
less, it doesn't create prepotency.
when you do create that prepotency at like a, let's just say, a 6.25. Okay. Now, when you that puppy comes out and he's 6.25. Let's say you kept a male from that, he's six
Right.
and a quarter. He has some amount of prepotency, homozygosity.
Some amount, right.
When you breed him to an outcross, now those puppies
Now
are
you
gonna
lost it. Now you lost it.
it's gonna be a three something.
Right.
So that means, how do you counter that? You may do an outcross to one that's carrying some more of those genetics to try to offset it to keep it at the five or above that you would want to be keeping some form of homozygosity in.
Correct. So what Jim is saying to you guys is that let's say you've gotten too tight in your blood and you've gotten a cousin mating to a first cousin, then you've done another cousin to cousin, and then you've done another cousin to cousin. Now you're 3 generations in, you have multiple generations of cousin to cousin marriages, right? Now you at the point where you're gonna start seeing um, disease because nature catches up to you. You can't, or you might not see disease, but you might see loss of fertility. And without fertility, you can't have puppies, and therefore you have nothing to sell. So
That's
you're
right.
going to see loss of hybrid vigor, or you're going to see loss of fertility, or what's called fecundity, the ability to be uh, breedable. In other words, having a good ability to breed. So
It's just
as
a
you lose,
to select. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So as you lose fertility, you have to outcross to loosen up the gene pool. You've gotten too tight. Now, what Jim is saying is, as you outcross, because you must, because now you're 3 or 4 generations into your program, if you don't exactly outcross to a completely raw blood, take an animal which is in the fifth or fourth generation, and you're still outcrossing in a sense because there's a lot of other dogs between that dog and your common ancestor you're line breeding upon, but that ancestor is so far back in time that you've reinvigorated the blood, but you haven't lost completely your entire result. In other words, the benefit of far away breeding, like a 4-4 or a 5-5, is that you have still essentially outcrossed, but you haven't lost that genes completely.
that's right.
And that's what Jim was saying. Is that right, Jim?
That's right, and that's why it's important. A lot of people are like, "Oh, uh, you shouldn't do line breeding," and other people are like, "I can't believe they're just outcrossing all the time." There's a need for both. I need for people to be outcrossing and have my own outcrosses, and the ability to line breed because if everybody was line, so there's a time for people to
Right.
inbreed, there's a time for people to line breed, and time for outcrossing. It's all part of the genetic process.
Correct. We're not saying never outcross. We're saying, let's say you have two line bred lines, right? Now they're line bred with, what does line breeding mean? You bring in line to that particular animal, which is the
If they
common,
were both prepotent,
right?
what does that cost? The male and female, if they're both prepotent in their own way, because that's a big thing.
On a different relative, right? When you marry them together, with
Yes,
respect to each other, they're an outcross. In other words, in their own line, they're prepotent on a relative you're inbreeding upon. But with respect to each other, they're considered an outcross because that relative is not common to both the male and the female.
That's right. And it would be like using two unrelated,
Right.
maybe outstanding,
Right.
each one of them, and you can get similar to that.
You get some very good results. Correct. So now, is there something wrong with pedigrees dogs? Are much simply healthier? So people always say line breeding, inbreeding is dangerous. They're afraid of it. I go to Facebook groups. People are like, oh, "You're inbreeding, you're line breeding. Oh, you're gonna have disease," and they freak out. Let's talk about that a little bit. And Jim, I'm going to ask you to expand on this point really quickly after I read this. Okay. Mutts are not healthier. It is rubbish to say there's a problem with all pedigree dogs. By culling out the weak example, many pedigrees dogs are genetically stronger due to selectively breeding out only the best of the best and eliminating all the weaklings. Number two, with so many animals in shelters, why even describing breeding dogs for profit if you can save a life and bring a companion home? Dogs and animals were also born and bred. You're justifying therefore giving poorly bred dogs to a home versus well-bred dog. If there were no breeders, the pure breeds would die out in less than 2 decades. Selective breeding of livestock has produced some of the world's fastest horses, cattle, and chickens in terms of meat and egg production. Why are we bringing dogs from meat markets in China and restocking our animal shelter? Some dogs are purpose bred to be police dogs, search and rescue dogs, or bomb sniffing dogs. Not just any dog will do. So, Jim, you've experienced a lot of pushback in Facebook groups you've been on and other forums where people are frowning upon what you're trying to do in your breed, and everybody outcrosses and they're afraid of line breeding, calling it inbreeding, and they're scared to death of it. Can you talk about that a
You
little
know,
bit and what you do?
it's not really I haven't had like the pushback. Oh, that's terrible. I see it and I hear it in a lot of threads and stuff. But it's because a lot of people like if I do line breeding, I do line breeding, I do outcrossing, and that's what I focus on, and that's what I do. You know, their agenda may be like, oh, I was told to outcross, and this and that and the other. And if you're not outcrossing, you're not right. What are you doing? They're just set in their way. They don't research. They don't even know enough about it. They've heard of it. They know 25%, 50%, 75%. They haven't sat
Right.
down and tried to figure out COI on an animal, which you almost need a program to do that for you in a lot of cases if you're doing
Yeah.
some good line breeding. You know what I mean?
Right. I think that the people who are producing dogs without consistency of any kind and are producing scatterbred dogs, I think they're
Just for
just they're producers. They're not breeders. I
I
call
have
them
one
producers.
example. I have one example that uh, a lot of people are like, "Oh, we don't need those dogs anymore. We've bred better and we've moved forward." Okay, so that means they're not backing up. If they do a breeding and they've discounted that male, that sire, and they're like, "We don't need him anymore. We produced better with going forward with our litter. We don't need him anymore." And that
Right.
usually works good the first time, and then that second time it's going to drop down below 5 if they were doing light line breeding. It was
Right.
homozygous. Now it's 3, and that second time comes out, oh, that didn't work. Now where are you going to go? You've off that male. You can't go back to him. And at the same
Right.
time, they say that we're moving forward. We're not going backwards. We don't need him anymore. They're like, oh, you should. And they say this like, I'm like, okay, so you're completely against keeping those dogs, re-influencing them.
Excuse me.
Like, and then in another statement, they might say, I've heard them say, "Oh, you should collect that dog. In 20 years, you're going to wish you had him." And I'm thinking, well, you just go forward. What do you mean? What is
Right.
it makes no sense.
They're hypocritical because on the one sense they're saying don't breed that back to that dog because even though he was a superior dog, we don't want to recreate him, we don't want to breed back to him, we want nothing to do with him.
It's
And then
work.
they're saying you want to collect him and use him in the future. Well, which is it? Do you want to recreate this dog or do you want to not recreate this dog? What you
Line
can't be.
breeding is a
You,
lot of work. Okay, line
right.
breeding is a lot of work. It's not just and people that are constantly outcrossing, it's a lot of work because they're even a phenotype alone. Okay, they have to know their animals. They
Right.
create a look. You can look at a dog they'd be like, oh, that's a such and such such and such's program because their dog has
Right.
developed look even through phenotype.
Right.
Okay, that you recognize that dog and you're like, that's John's dog or that's
Right.
Joe's dog, or you can tell it's from their yard because they put all
Right.
these years in. And the biggest part is assessing your animal, learning their behavior because you're going to learn their temperaments. You're going to see what they pass as you go. Line breeding, even if you're just visually trying to do it, and even more so tracking the genetic information to do something like this is a lot of work to stay on
Correct.
top of, a lot of research.
Correct. Because you have to know your pedigree to do that. Whereas with now, let's talk about the relationships a little bit. So parent to child has a 75% COR and there's a 25% COI. Now, what does that mean? Coefficient of relationship is he is a father is 50% of the genes, but he is a grandfather of his own kid through his own daughter is 25% of the genes. Therefore, he's 75%. Okay. Risk
But
very high.
what it means is you need to cross that out to a completely unrelated and get down to 12 and
Dog,
a half
because yeah,
as you
you're gonna
can.
be in, yeah, you're gonna be in doo doo with
It'd be a good
defects pretty
selection.
soon. Yeah,
You have a good selection to breed it to as well when you do.
that's right. That's right. Grandparent to grandchild. So this is a little bit looser, but not much. So that grandfather, with respect to his own granddaughter, is 12.5%.
All of that
He's
is
a,
very prepotent.
that's right. All of these are very prepotent combinations, by the way.
But if
But
you have
then he's
great
going to be the father. Also, that's 50%.
but if you have outstanding uh,
Individual.
representatives from it, that's the whole reason you do this
Right.
to at a higher percentage because you've done it
They're an
properly.
outstanding example of the breed.
Now
So by
some of them,
doing it, right,
you know,
like if you do a grandparent to grandchild, usually grandfather to granddaughter, uh, one reason might be the dog is going to be dying soon because he's old. Remember, he's old enough to be a grandparent, so therefore he's much older than his granddaughter. So you want to preserve the blood of that animal. You're creating what's called a seed stock animal. What does a seed stock animal mean? It means that dog, which has been inbred upon, well, no matter what he's bred to, will pass himself. And because this was such an outstanding individual, you want to perpetuate him. Now, if dog is not worth perpetuating, you don't want to do this. So that's for
no,
an outstanding individual. Right now, half siblings, 50% related to the same father, because or mother. It could be a female bred to two different males at two different times, and their pups from two different litters
that's
at two
right.
different times are 50% that mother, but two different fathers. It could be like that. One parent, whether mother or father is 50%. It's 12.5% COI. Notice the COI is a quarter of the COR. 12.5 is a quarter of 50%. Risk high. Full siblings. Now you have 50% on parent A and 50% on parent B. COI 25%. This is the highest of the highest risk that you can do because now you're inbreeding on two parents rather than one. And if there's a disease, you don't know which side of the family it came from.
That's
So
right.
if
That's
you're
right.
gonna do this is the highest risk situation you can possibly get into. Now, so the next combination I want to talk about is line breeding combination. So the previous screen was inbreeding combinations. This screen is line breeding combination. So the first combination is first cousins, 3-3. Common grandfather. Remember, you have four grandparents. So one grandparent is a quarter of all the genes because there are four grandparents. So a coefficient of relationship is 25%. Remember the math. One quarter of 25% is 6.25%. If you multiply 4 times 6.25, it'll be 25%. The next combination, 3-4. First cousins once removed. What does that mean? It means you have two cousins, and this cousin had a child with an unrelated dog, and you're breeding the cousin to the child of this cousin. That's called
Right.
first cousins once removed, 3-4. 18.75% COR. COI is 4.83%. It's below 6.25. Is it influential? Somewhat. Now, this is the most common one nowadays being done in German Shepherds. In Germany, they've outlawed 2-3 line breedings. They used to allow it, which is half uncle to niece, but they don't allow it anymore. The closest you can do is 3-3. So it's now very common in Germany, in German Shepherds, to do a 3-4. That's what you will see many times in German pedigrees. I've seen this many, many times. Now, second cousins, 4-4, common great grandfather, 12.5% COR, 3 and 125% COI. Now notice 4 times 3 is 12. So notice 3.125 is a quarter of 12.5.
That's right.
Finally, you got third cousins, 6.25% COR and a quarter of 6.25. I think it's 1.56 is the COI. Notice the number always goes down, 6.25, 3.125, 1.56. And so the way it works is, let me show it to you in a diagram. Now we're going to have full siblings. A and B have the same parents. Sire, dam, they're full brother, full sister. They'll create X as the puppy. That's full sibling marriage. By contrast, half sibling marriage, notice A is one parent. The same A is on this side. So this stud dog was married with this female, call her B, to produce a stud dog named S. And the same father, we'll call him A, was married to a female named K to produce daughter D. And then S and D had a puppy X. So notice it's the half sibling relationship. A and A is the same dog on both sides. That's a half sibling mating. Now, how does the math look? Let's do the math. Half sibling is written as 2-2, common sire. Why 2-2? Because this is the child with the count 1, 2, 3 as the grandparent, but this is the same parent. So common sire would be 1/2 squared. In other words, 2 generations back. Why 1/2? Because the same ancestor is half the genes. You know, half the genes from the mother, half the genes from the father. You don't get all your genes, you get half of them. So it's 1/2 squared plus 1/2 squared, which is 1/4 plus 1/4, which is 2/4, which is 50%. The COI is 1/4 of the COR. 1/4 of 50% is 12.5%. So this is a half sibling marriage. Now,
Hey, Alex, I have a
next,
question
yeah,
about that
yes,
real
sir,
quick.
yes, sir.
Can you go back to it?
Yeah, let me go back to that one. Yeah.
Now, when we're talking about these 3, 2, and 2, 3, or 3, 3, now the offspring, he has no contribution to himself.
No,
So,
he's 100% of his grandparents or
so
parents, right?
when we're talking a 2, 2, wouldn't you
Right.
say that the one position is the parents, and then those parents are the two in the two
Right.
position?
Two
Not
two
half.
is the S and the D. Right. I misspoke earlier. Right. Correct.
Okay,
Thanks for correcting me. So the S and the D are
is
two
one.
is the 2-2. Right. Because he's the
Yes,
one. This is one. He's himself. I'm one. I'm with respect to myself.
right.
And the parent before me is 2. I'm 1. Therefore, this is 2.
That's
And
right.
this is 2, the female. So when we're talking 2 here, we're talking about with respect to the parents.
That's right. And
So
a lot of times,
that's
because I was asked about that as well. That's why I want to
right.
bring it up from
Yeah,
someone. And I'm like, we're talking about the sire and the dam, not in the
that's right.
grandparents
Not the
position.
grandparents. Correct. So this is the relationship of, that's right. Now, next drawing. Now we're going to do first cousins. So instead of having a common parent like we hear, it's a common parent. The same sire on both sides produce these two half siblings, right? Same male with two different moms produce these half siblings, right? It's the same parent. Here
Those
it's the
half
same,
are the two.
those are half, correct. These are two half siblings, half cousins. Why? So we're gonna do it. Let me take you through this drawing. We have grandsire one bred with grandmother K. We'll call the female grandmother K, just for the sake of a name. Then the same grandsire one, was partnered with grandmother R. So far it looks like we had half siblings. Now, they produced sire one and sire two. Now, who are sire one and sire two with respect to each other? They're half siblings because they have the same grandsire on both sides. So sire 1 and sire 2 are half brothers. Okay. And half brother A, sire 1, is bred to an unrelated female, mother A, and his half brother, sire 2, is bred to an unrelated female called mother B. They're not sisters, they're unrelated. And then so half brother 1 is bred to mother A, half brother 2 is bred to mother B. Out of this sire, you produced a male child called S. Out of this sire, you produced a female child called D, D for damn, and you're producing puppy X. Now, what's common here? Well, the common grandparent is in the third generation. This is one generation, second generation, third generation. In other words, it's a common grandparent in this example. So instead of having a common father, they have a common grandfather. That's half first cousins. Why half? Because they only have one common grandparent, not 2 out of 4. 2 out of 4 grandparents common is full first cousins. One grandparent common out of 4 is half first cousins.
And in
Now,
this
go back to
diagram,
that. Yeah,
no, that's fine. That one was fine. Yeah. So in this one, you're coming out with the same outcome of doing it this way as to whereas if you're in a situation where you're going to breed your, the father back to the daughter, and they use
right,
the brother instead, it would be going around the father focusing on the grandsire or the
right. And
grand.
in fact, I'm about to show something similar to that. So let's talk about that. Now, this looks a little bit complicated, but it's not. This is Brackett's formula for those who don't know. This is a half uncle to niece mating called a 2-3 mating. What does that mean, 2-3? It means this, let's just go to the pedigree first, and then we'll go through it slowly, okay? You got grandsire, father, SH. We'll call him SH. That's the name of this dog. We'll call grandsire's mother, we'll call her grandmother T, okay? So we got grandsire SH, grandmother T, okay? Now, the same two grandparents are producing grandsire 1. It's the same grandparents, okay? Grandfather SH, grandmother T, grandfather SH, grandmother T, okay? Now, grandsire 1 is bred to mother A. So in this case, he's acting as the sire of the puppy. See, he's the sire of this puppy with mother A. So on this side, he acts as the sire. But here, this grandsire is in the third position, not in the second position. He created sire 2, his son, made with mother B, and then his son with mother B produced daughter D. Daughter D bred with his son produced puppy X. So in this case, his son contributed to creating a granddaughter, daughter D. So he's the grandsire who produced sire 2, who produced daughter D. Now, the hybrid vigor comes from mother R, unrelated, mother B, unrelated, mother A, unrelated. So these 3 dogs, mother A, mother B, and mother R, are creating uh, heterozygosity or not related blood. Whereas this dog being repeated creates homozygosity, repeated blood. So this is why this is line breeding. You're creating unrelated dogs and related dogs.
Now, in
In
relation,
inbreeding, right. You're only breeding in related dogs, but in line breeding, you have unrelated dogs and related dogs, creating your combination. So notice mother A unrelated, mother B unrelated, grandmother R unrelated. So these 3 females are creating unrelated blood, but this male is related blood. So now in this position, he's in the third generation. See 2, 3. So it's 1, 2, 3 with respect to daughter. With respect to this, it's 1. This is a letter S missing here. This is 1, 2. So this is 2 generations over here and 3 generations over here.
yes.
This is a half uncle to niece mating.
Now, with the respect of that, just for information purposes for me and anybody watching, what would a COR and COI of
The
that?
COR would be 37.5%, and the COI would be about 9.35%. 37% or 9.6. I don't remember. I have to do the math in the calculator. Now, what
Right.
that does is if you have half siblings, they're in the same generation.
That's
So
right.
your CO is 50%. But by making this ancestor one generation lower, third generation here, but second generation here, you dropped it from 50% to 37.5% as COR, and you dropped it from 12.5% to 9.63% as COI.
And it's a safer method of going through it
It's much safer because
than using a brother from the father to go back to the daughter. It's not
right,
instant gratification. You're dragging other
dog,
influences, your dogs with
correct,
it.
correct. So if you look at this situation, the one before it, the only heterozygosity you have in half siblings, this is half siblings, is that these are two unrelated females with the common male, right? So you have only two fresh lines coming in, and they're only 25% each, whereas the father is 50% each. So you're not introducing a lot of unrelated blood. You're reducing, really, you're cutting down the female line and you're increasing the blood of the male line. Whereas here, instead of having two unrelated females, you have three unrelated females. Grandmother R, mother A, mother B. Now you have three unrelated females.
That's
You know,
right.
you versus two. So now you have three unrelated dogs. Despite focusing on this dog, you have three unrelated dogs. So there's more chance for genetic shuffle, and therefore
Yes. Now
it's
this is
safer.
Brackett's formula.
This is
So,
Brackett's formula.
so
That's right.
this is when if someone wanted to do some line breeding that was concerned with because they're like, oh, I don't want to do half brother, half sister. This is how you do it to line breed and do it safely
That's
to
right. It's
the
been
outcome.
proven.
And it takes time. How many years is that right there in generations? That it's
Well,
going
assuming your dog is bred not before 2 years of age, which is the only minimum age you should start breeding, because you don't want to breed kids, you want to breed adults. You got to let the dogs grow up right now. So 3 generations back on this dog, that's 6 years minimum, assuming you bred him at age 2, and then 2 generations back over here. So this is 6 years
yeah.
minimum, and that's assuming he
So
was proven by 2 years. He may have not been proven by 2 years.
So when someone says they're line breeding, trying to do it safely by using similar to Brackett's formula,
Right.
they're not. That's 6 years.
6 years to get to this game. That's right.
You're not even you're not hurting the entire breed. You're not even damaging your own program
Right.
by doing it this way. And another 6 years where you know what I mean?
That's right. Because now here's another example where you could do the opposite. It could be doing on the female. Oh, I drew the same drawing. I meant to change it. My bad. Okay. Now what we're gonna do the math, okay? Because I'm gonna show it visually, but I want to show it mathematically. So the COR are first cousins, common grandsires, 1/2 cubed plus 1/2 cubed, which is 1/8 plus 1/8, which is 1/4, which is 25%. The COI is 1/4 of the COR. Now, by the way, these numbers are Hardiman's numbers, not Wright's numbers. For those who don't now, and they're also not embark numbers. So, as I mentioned in other videos, don't confuse pedigree COI with embark COI or Wright's equation.
This is
Wright's equation doesn't
your
work.
program, your family of dogs, your family of dogs, your
Your family of
program, your
dogs and your yard, not in the breed as a
yes,
whole. Right. This
they're
is
different.
just
Different numbers. They're different numbers.
yep, different numbers. Right now, so this is basically doing fractions. Everybody, I believe, should be able to do fractions. So COI is 1/4 of the COR, so 1/4 of 25% is 6.25%. Now, in doing Brackett's formula, half uncle to half niece, or opposite, half aunt to nephew, same idea. Instead of 2/3, it's 3/2. So it's the granddaughter of that common male met to a son of the common male.
That's right.
Versus the opposite, the son of the common male met to the grand. In other words, it's a grandchild on one side, but a child on the other side. Simply the sex is different. Here
Yeah.
it's the granddaughter with the grandson. Here it's the son with the granddaughter. But it's the same concept. A
Focusing on
plus
the
B. Say again, Jim. I didn't hear you well.
female.
Yeah, we
Focusing
broke
on
up.
the female.
focusing on the female, which is a more powerful way, but mathematically it's the same. So let's just do the math. 1/2 cubed plus 1/2 squared is 1/8 plus 1/8, and 1/4 is 2/8. So that makes it the sum 3/8. 3/8 is 37.5%. A quarter of 37.5% is 9.375%. So what do we have? Half siblings is 12.5. First cousins is 6 1/4. Now we're exactly in the middle. We're at a little bit below 10, close to 10. We're below 12.5, but above 6 1/4. We're the sweet spot. That's what this formula
That's right.
gives you, basically. That's what this formula gives you. Now, so this is Brackett's formula. Notice the position of the dog. Here he's a grandfather, and here he's a father. That's the bottom line. Now, I'm going to close the slideshow and stop sharing. Now, what I wanted to go over with Jim is uh, let's look at some pedigrees, Jim, if you don't mind, and
No
let's
problem.
see how that looked in real life. Do you agree with that?
Yes, do it.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, so I'm gonna share some. I'm gonna bring it up so I can see the screen first, so I can do.
Is it the one I want?
Let me. Yeah, I'm gonna share this right screen here. Otherwise, I want to present the right screen. Bear with me, guys. I'm not that fast with this software, so just give me a
Hey,
second.
that's not the one that I shared with you, right?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. But if you want to share something yourself,
No,
you're more than welcome.
it's not one of mine that I've shared with you, right?
Oh no, I don't think so. No.
All right.
All right. Notice this dog, Abigail of Longworth. Remember I told about Lloyd Bracket. Notice the year 1953. That's a
Oh
long
yeah,
time ago.
yeah.
Now notice the breeding we're dealing with. Notice what it says. 3-2 on champion Nix von Longworth. Hardiman's coefficient 9.96. Now, remember I told you guys it's a quarter of the COR? That's an estimate. That's not precise. That's more or less a quarter of the COR. So notice in precisely calculating it, it's 9.96. In this dog, another dog, it may be 9.3. In another dog, it may be 9.6. In other words, the COI being a quarter of the COR, it's approximate. It's not the exact formula. It's just a rough rule of thumb. It's not exact. Okay, just FYI. Now,
Right.
notice these tab stops 4-3 and 4-3. Do you guys see that? What it's saying is this is the papa of this dog Nix, Elga von Saliba, and this is the mama of this dog, Gary of Benlor. Notice it says Rom, Register of Merit. This was a Westminster Kennel Club winner, basically. Now, so if the dog is 3-2, his parents are therefore 4-3. You see how that works? If he's in the third generation, his father is in the fourth generation. If he is in the second generation, his mother is in the third generation. In other words, so if you're breeding on this dog as a 3-2, you're breeding on his parents, both of them, as 4-3. You see that? And then the great grandparents are therefore 5-4, 5-4. You see how that works? The
That's
tab
right.
stops is the so when you're bringing forth a dog into the pedigree, you're bringing forth, therefore, you can't help but breed on his parents and grandparents if you're inbreeding on him. You follow how that
It's
works?
faster. Hey, it's faster to lose it than it is to gain it because every time you come forward a generation, you've lost half of all of that work because they go back one
Exactly.
generation.
Exactly. Now notice this breeding is a very interesting breeding. 3-4, then 5. Now, this gets back to Jim's point about backmassing. Now, this ancestor is in the third generation, in the fourth generation, and in the fifth generation. This is a grandfather, great grandfather, and a great great grandfather. So somebody really liked this dog. Seeger, SGR, Seeger, 1937, champion, CH. Pfeiffer von Bern, Ram, Register of Merit, 6. So even though he's in the fifth generation, because he's repeated in the third and fourth generation, by repeating him 3 times in a row, we have 6.45%. So even though 3-3 is 6 1/4, here he's in the fifth and fourth, so he's would be less, right? But because he's been repeated and accumulated so many times, he's effectively like a grandfather, even though he's a great grandfather and a great great grandfather. See what I mean about backmassing?
Okay,
And
now explain
if
that
you,
3, 4, 5. The
so he's
three
a
comma four.
grandfather. So notice it's 3 comma 4 then dash. Notice the way
That's
it's
right.
written. What it means is that in the father on the left is always the male. So this dog in the father was a 3-4 line breeding. Not very
That's right.
powerful. Remember I told you 3-4 is not very
That's right.
powerful?
That's right.
But then he was bred to the female, which had that same dog in the 5th generation. And a non-powerful mating all of a sudden became a powerful mating
That's
because
right.
the dog was repeated. That's the point of this. Now, if you look
Yeah,
at
I
this
just
dog, I don't know if
talking
you
about the backpassing. I just wanted to point out for the people watching that, yeah, 3 comma 4 means it's on the sire side, and there's a dash, and there he is again
right,
on to
right. The
the
dash means that's the mother side,
side.
and the comma means double on the father side.
Yes.
Right. Now notice these dogs look identical to each other. If you click on Nix of Longworth, this is another Longworth dog, right, from the Longworth kennel who developed the brackets formula, right? Notice this is from what 1934 or something like that. When was she? 1942. This is during World War II. Notice she herself is a 4-4, in other words, in other words, a double second cousin marriage, V rated, in other words, V rated means a high level champion. Dachs von Bern, 5.47, and a 5.5 on Seeger from 1925. Now notice the numbers, 5.47 and 2.54. So she's not inbred on one dog, she's inbred on 2 dogs. But the point is that these are not just any dogs. Notice it says Seeger. That's the winner of all of Germany in 1925. Of course, 1925 was before World War II. That's why he was able to get this dog, and it's 5 generations away because this is a dog from 1942. So 1925 would have been, you can tell from the year, 1942, and this dog is from 1925. You see the, so this is 20, over 20 years time span between this dog and this dog. So that tells you how long line breeding takes. This is a dog from 1925, and this is a dog from 1942. Now, what's significant about this female is that she's part of the other dog's pedigree I just showed you, but she's line bred herself. In other words, you're accumulating the dogs you like in the pedigree by repeating them. So that's my point. Now let's show another pedigree to show the example again,
Hey,
because
Alex.
it's not obvious what I'm saying. Yes, sir.
Hey, I don't mean to be popping in there while you're explaining, but I just want to point things out
No,
while
no.
we're there, so I don't forget
Yeah, of
uh,
course. That's no,
to bring.
no. You're more than welcome. Yeah,
Even considering those 20 years, that's not
right.
counting the the breedings that happened that there wasn't in there worth selecting to keep back because
Right.
for that
That's
for
that's the
selected.
point. That's the point. You made a very good point. Notice the dogs which were selected, or V in the German Shepherd, you have SG, sehr gut, then V, then VA, select. So notice the dogs selected are like the LeBron James of dogs. In other words, they were the creme de la creme dogs. They were not like any dogs, but they were the la creme dogs of their time period.
They
Now,
were the apex
they were
animal.
the top of the top of the top. They were the creme de la
Yeah,
creme, as judged by a judge, not by the breeder, because a breeder may have kennel blindness and may love his own dogs,
that's right.
but a judge is a neutral arbiter. So that was as determined by a judge. Now,
Yeah, you
back
have to
then,
be
there,
honest with your own self, with your own assessment of your own animals, because you develop an eye and you develop those abilities to make sure you're keeping the right animal. And if you're not,
right,
you're back to the
then
drawing
you
board.
must discard it from the
You
breeding
lost two
program,
years.
right?
You lost 2 years, and you might repeat that
For
breeding
nothing,
reason. You're looking
right?
for the best example of those dogs blind breeding, passing their traits on forward. Keep
Exactly. If you look at the example I just gave, the the great 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 grandfather, which is 5th generation, there's a 20-year time span between 1925 and 1943. Why so long? Because they were waiting to see how the dogs developed. So notice this is not a fast game. Notice
nope.
in the example I just gave, there was a 20-year time span between That dog was so well loved. He was a grandfather, great grandfather, and a great grandfather because they thought so highly of him. So he was worth repeating, even though so much time has passed. So Jim is making a
That's right.
valid point. You're not lion breeding for the sake of lion breeding. In other words, or if you're inbreeding, not inbreeding for the sake of inbreeding. You're inbreeding
Even
on a
worse if
dog.
you're live breeding if you're not doing it properly. Even worse.
Even worse because you'll amplify the bad traits, not the good traits, right?
Like
So
now,
there is selection pressure involved, not just, in other words, we're showing you how the genetics line up in terms of the relationships between these ancestors, but we're showing you that the creme de la creme animals were selected and a lot of time passed to figure out which animals are which are what they're worth and what they're not worth. The dogs must be proven, and then we are
and
line
if
breeding on the best examples.
they don't pass the test
Right.
for selection, there went
Out of
that
the
time, and now you've got to back up. Maybe use that one that you saved back, that male that you're trying to do it with. Now you've got to repeat the breeding, find a better
right.
selection. There went two
Right.
years. Now we're at 2 years.
Now you've lost 2 years because now that with that particular female, he didn't work out. He maybe didn't have a scissor bite, or maybe he didn't have the right temperament. It's very hard to breed out aggression in dogs. Aggression is very hard to breed out. Maybe he produced with that female a super aggressive dog, or maybe he produced a dog with weak nerves who's a
With the
fear
line
biter.
breeding, we're just trying to breed into the characteristics of a great apex animal being brought forward to be able to produce itself to give those offspring the abilities to be able to
That's
do
right.
their work and the
To be able to
characteristics
do their work. Correct.
supposed to.
So that brings up another important point. How do you know which dog is worth lion breeding or non breeding? By conformation alone? No. You have to have some kind of a test to prove the dog. So if you're breeding a terrier and it can't be a good ratter and it can't hunt rats, then that's not a good terrier. You see what I'm saying?
That's
So
right.
dogs were not always pets. Dogs worked. So if you had to get rid of rats and the terrier was afraid of a rat, it's not a dog you want to keep.
That's right.
So
It's hard because you know I have a few mentors, and they're all good at mentoring. A lot of similarities. Some have other information that others don't have that help you to develop yourself to do you, focusing on your goal. Do
that's
you,
right.
do your research. You can't, it's never ending. Always researching, always discussing with other breeders, this, that, being able to not, like call someone out, and be like, oh, you're doing it wrong. Well, do you know your own animals? How do you have time to know someone else's yard and their animals and what they're doing? Try to help each other, to come up with some
Right.
answers and share your experiences as you go,
Right. And also, you have to consider the expense of all this because we're talking about genetics. Okay, that's all well and good. But remember, you had to feed and house so many animals, and you're dealing with living things. It's a lot of responsibility. You're not dealing with toasters,
10 to
and
15 year commitment
10 to
per,
15-year commitment per dog. So you have to figure out what are I call it carrying costs. Because in real estate, if you're flipping a house, you're paying the mortgage interest while you're repairing it until you can flip it, right? Where you get your money out of it, right? But in the meantime, you're carrying the mortgage note until you can flip it, right? Let's say that's called a
that's right.
carrying cost. That's a term from real estate, right? So in dogs, in my breeding program, I estimate easily, on average, 250 a month in food and vet costs and housing costs. Times 4 dogs, that's 1,000 a month. So 14 dogs, I mean, the size of the breed determines how much food you spend. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But if you're breeding dogs, you don't want to give them crappy food. You want to give them
Or the
good food.
quality, or the
The
quality.
quality of the food has to be good food. You can't give them crap.
Can't
Now,
give, can't give them 7% fat. And
no, you have to keep them like athletes. You got to exercise them. You got to keep them maintained. You got to train them. You got to prove them. You got to take them to shows. You got to do work. You got to work them. you can't just breed and just have a bunch of dogs in your yard and now
Just
you,
for the sake of
just for
breeding,
the sake of breeding and making money.
and
That's not how it works.
just for the sake of inbreeding. Oh, look, I got a double on this. Well, what? Why did you do that? You have to know
Why?
why
Yeah,
you want to do
yeah.
something. What's your purpose?
What's the
You're
purpose?
doing
What kind of characteristics do you want in that animal? Right. So basically, you have to understand what you're doing, while you're doing it, and while you're doing all this, you're living life, you're raising your family. Most people have kids. Kids go to college. That's a big expense. You might have a wedding for your daughter when she's in the right age. That's a big expense. So breeders, this is kind of a way of life, guys. This is not just like
and then
a
you do it.
occasional thing. You know what I mean? It's a
That
way of
breed,
life.
then you do that breeding. It's like, oh man, I can't wait and all that. And oh wow, now we got a C-section. Oh man, you
Yeah,
have losses. You know, you may have lost the whole thing, all of them. Mother
yeah.
puppies, or just all the puppies, or just a mother. Now you better did you do
Now, yeah, C-section,
your
emergency
feeding,
C-section
bottle
is
feeding.
$500. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
People think breeding is easy. You put two dogs together, they mate, and it's easy. No, it's not. First of all, not always two dogs mate. It's not that easy. Sometimes a female will reject the male. Sometimes the male is inexperienced. Sometimes you miss the heat cycle. Basically, you've just lost all the money for that litter because you didn't take.
hey, that's
Also,
another.
you might go ahead, Jim. Yeah,
That's another thing. What about uh, giving vaccinations or medications or flea medicines while your mother's carrying your
right.
puppy, or even previous to their cycle? Those things can affect when it could prolong them from coming to the cycle. It could make it not come around the time that you're expecting. It could put it
Correct.
off.
Also, exactly, and also vitamins affected. For example, when you have a female in your yard, you gotta give those B vitamins, guys. You gotta give those folic acid, like just like pregnant women. You gotta give them folic acid. You gotta give them the B vitamins. You increase their food intake. You give them high quality vitamins. That's why I said new vitamins because you gotta give them the folic acid. You gotta give them the B vitamins for them to come into heat. What I also found, you have a little bit of a skin condition. Give them sardines for the omega 3, omega 6. Give them a little bit of sardines. That gives you omega 6, omega 3. It's all natural. It's a sardine can. It will cost you what, 78 cents a can, whatever
That's right.
that is.
That's
But
right.
the bottom line is, what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is, you gotta take care of your dogs, guys. This is not, we're discussing lion breeding, but it's in the context of breeding as a business. In other words, it's not genetic experiments, because if you want to do genetic experiments, you need to have a short-lived animal. So if you have guinea pigs or rats or mice, you can
Chicken,
do genetic experiments because they have a very short lifespan. You
like
want
a
to do
chicken.
genetic experiment? Chickens, yeah. Chickens live only 3 years, so they're gonna die anyhow.
Some live long. They end up in the pot faster than anything else.
That's
You
right.
know,
You have a mistake, what you did, you put them in the
they'll come
pot,
out
you
there,
cook it.
they'll be gone for no reason, or a predator got them. Maybe not here on my yard because my dogs are ready for the
You have
predators.
you have chickens, Jim.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, okay. So you see what I'm saying? So breeding birds and breeding dogs is very different. You don't like what you do with a bird, you're gonna eat it, and you have no
Hey,
problem.
that's what they do. The chickens give us eggs and feed us and our animals as well.
Right.
For
That's
when
right.
they eat chicken, and
That's right.
you know, and they make lovely pets. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah, yeah.
they taste great.
Well, the people can inbreed chickens a lot further. They can inbreed dogs without any problems because in birds, the role of the sexes is reversed. In mammals, you have X and Y chromosome, and the female has XX, and the male determines the gender of the child, but depending if he passes on X or he passes a Y. But in birds, the female has I think it's Z and GG. If I forgot what they're called.
I have a friend that does that, and I'm like, everyone he'll call and he'll talk about the genetics on the chickens, and I'm like, you're the you're the chicken person. I leave it to him.
Yeah, chicken genetics is bird genetics, which is not different from reptile genetics because birds came from dinosaurs. But the bottom line is, mammalian genetics and reptile genetics is not identical. There's similarities. I mean, cousins are cousins and uncles are uncles, but You could inbreed a lot further with birds without any deleterious effects, but you can't do that with mammals. You have to be careful
You
that
know,
you don't have congenital defects.
Alex, I know we're going to be closing it up here pretty soon, and I just want to be able to say, that research, you can learn from someone new, old. If you've been doing it 30 years, you can learn from somebody younger. You do your research. Just because someone says, "Oh, this is who said to do this," I was there. It might be have been that may have been their experience along their journey. We're all on our own journeys,
Right.
and it, you got to do you and and know your goals and go for them accordingly with what your plan is.
I agree. What I wanted to add is that in everything you do, you must be ethical. And let me explain what I mean by that. There's a couple of facets. And the reason Jim is here is because, as a guest of this show, I don't deal with people who are not ethical. I believe ethics is everything. So let me touch a couple of points. There's a test now called Embark, which tests for genetic diseases. For $150 for the first dog and $100 for every other dog in your yard, they give you a discount once you buy one kit. You can pretty much identify every genetic disease that, not everything, but a lot. So a breeder that doesn't embark their dogs, doesn't test, and they're going to embark upon inbreeding dogs, they shouldn't be doing that because they're not sure they're going to partner a carrier with another carrier. And you do that before you breed, not after you breed. You have to test, number one. Number two, in large breed dogs like mine, Jim has a small breed, so hip dysplasia is not a problem because the weight of the dog is so small. Hips are not really affected by weight. But in a large breed dog like mine, which is a German Shepherd, or a Great Dane, or a Mastiff, or a Rottweiler, these are big breeds with a lot of weight on them. You should do hip x-rays and figure out if you have a potential hip dysplasia issue. Now, what I will say is if it's unilateral hip dysplasia, not bilateral, it's usually environmental, not genetic. But if it's bilateral hip dysplasia, in other words, both hips, it's usually genetic. But you can rule that out by testing your dogs. Another thing, don't breed them too young. Don't breed a 1-year-old female. She's like a 16-year-old girl. She's a teenager. She's not an adult. That's number three.
And
Number
age,
four.
just the age, you still need to assess your animal. Are they mature?
Well, if people who are
There's
breeding
no,
strictly for money, they don't care. They just want to breed.
yeah, I mean, they may be 2 years old and still acting like a
Develop.
kid. You're going to end up with a
Yeah,
mother, if you breed them too soon,
that's
that
right.
is going to be interested in taking care of your puppies, maybe, be like,
Now you're
they,
bottle feeding 12 puppies.
they may consume them because they're,
Yeah,
there's lots of things to happen, they're
that's right.
not
That's right.
ready mentally and physically.
That's
You may
right.
have, you
Maybe
may have the
2 years
opportunity
old,
of,
but mentally not grown up yet. Yeah,
yeah,
it varies. There's no hard and fast rule. You got to watch the individual female. The other thing you have to be able to do is take a dog back. If
some
your
of them
dog is,
early, but physically they're not matured, but mentally they might. But so you just gotta, form bonds with your animals, learn their behaviors, watch and learn. They will tell you if you listen, they're gonna speak to
that's right. You have to have a relationship with your dogs. You have to be and train your dogs. You have to have some. You just can't have dogs in your yard that you haven't trained. You don't have an obedience relationship with them. You don't have a familial relationship with them. You have to know your animals and you have to care about your animals. I know I put a lot of sleepless nights with a litter that is on the ground because they have to be fed every 2 hours, be kept extra warm. It takes a very caring person to be a breeder, and it's not for everybody, guys.
you.
So I just
Getting
want
back
to make sure people know that.
getting back to your embark, I wanted to say something before we got too far away from it. But you know, breed relevant diseases. We
Mhm.
have a couple of breed that is genetic diseases that are relevant to our breed that we test for.
Correct.
For me, since I use forms and methods of line breeding, by the time the genetic information gets reported somewhere that you've seen it popping up in other places in your breed, a different genetic disease other than the couple that we test for, by the time they get all the information gathered, reported from all over throughout the breed that it becomes relevant. Now it's all over the place. But if you
Right.
see it, it's in the breed.
Right.
It's in the breed. I see it in my breed, but it's
Right.
not relevant. But if it's in the breed, you better believe that it's going to be relevant, and you can head it off before you wait for them to say it's
Yeah.
relevant. Breed.
That happened in the German Shepherd in the UK. They had epilepsy, and they found it goes back to one particular famous grandsire called the popular sire syndrome. In other words, he was used a lot as a stud dog, so he's in a lot of dogs' pedigrees. He had epilepsy. Now, once they traced it, the question becomes, well, now you know which dogs produce epilepsy, which females are his daughters which produce epilepsy. Epilepsy usually appears in sons and not in daughters, and daughters are carriers. Well, do you put those females down because they carry epilepsy? You invested a lot of money into those dogs, a lot of love and a lot of care. Do you put them down or do you spay them and never use them for breeding again? It goes back to ethics. If you have a disease that is spreading like wildfire in your breed, as example, epilepsy in the UK happened in German Shepherds in the 50s and 60s. I have a book which has a chapter on it. I don't have it in front of me, but I can I can quote it, and it's what I'm saying is accurate. It's based on that author. Well, if you found which females carried that male, which was proven to be an epileptic dog, which causes epilepsy, do you then stamp out that entire line because you're going to have diseases? Now, if you're ethical, you should. You should completely spay all those dogs or neuter every carrier from that family tree. Start again. But a lot of breeders will know the dog has epilepsy. They know it. And they says, oh, I'm going to pet him out. So the fact that you didn't want to do it means somebody else has to have a sick dog which has seizures because you were too focused on making money with the dog you have, even though you knew it had epilepsy. So again, guys, I'm talking about ethics here. Ethics is a very critical in being a breeder. You have to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it. Have to have goals, but you have to have ethics. That is the key that everybody will tell you. Jim,
Oh,
you have anything to add?
that's about it for me. I mean, I can't think of anything we didn't touch base on that we were wanting to talk about. And for sure, glad that you invited me in for it.
Oh,
I talked to
absolutely.
you. So,
It was a
I don't know
pleasure.
everything. I just want, I just want to say, you know what? I don't know everything. I just know this much compared to the rest of the world, and everybody's little piece can make it great.
You're too modest, guys. Jim is invited to the show. We've become fast friends, but he speaks the same language as I do, and he truly understands line breeding. If you want to get a fox terrier, one of the best ones in the country, I believe Jim is your man.
Oh, I think that was
So,
probably in my breed. The fox terrier was. But if you want a Jack Russell terrier,
oh, Jack Russell Terrier. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I'm not good with terriers. I'm sorry. But what I'm saying is, go to Jim's website and YouTube channel, and I'm sure you'll be very happy if you get a dog out of him. And if you want a German Shepherd, come to me. But if you want a Jack Russell Terrier,
that's
go to
right.
Jim.
That's right.
I
I
have a
always,
litter. I have a. You have a litter on the ground, Jim?
I do have a litter on the
Okay.
ground.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll post your phone number on the end of this video so that people can contact you for puppies. And I'm gonna post my phone number at the end of this video because I have an upcoming litter and now accepting deposits. I don't have puppies in the ground yet, but I'm accepting deposits. So if you want to talk to ethical people, which put a lot of love into their puppies and give them a lot of love, you know, I think you found two good guys here that will
Alex,
give you
I
their
appreciate the
heart.
I appreciate the plug, Alex. I appreciate you having me, and we'll
Yep.
talk to you the next time.
Awesome. And I'll put Jim's Facebook page, Instagram, and all those social media links in the description. And all right, Jim. Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you later.
Thank
Peace
you.
out.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye. And that wraps up another episode of the Von Ganta House YouTube channel. Thank you for being part of our German Shepherd community. Remember, you can stay connected to us beyond the podcast. Find us on all the major media platforms by searching for Van Ganta House. Whether it's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, just hit that follow button or that subscribe button to join the conversation and get the latest updates. If you have a burning question or want to apply to be a guest on our show, we would love to hear from you. Simply shoot us an email at vangantahouse@gmail.com. And if you are a business interested in becoming a sponsor, reach out to us at the same email address at vangantahouse@gmail.com. For more resources, exclusive content, puppy reservations, visit our website at vangantahouse.com. We have blogs and articles you might enjoy as well. It's your go-to destination for everything German Shepherd and working dog sports related content. Thank you once again for tuning in. We can't wait to speak with you again, where we explore the fascinating world of breeding, training, genetics, and our wonderful breed. Look forward to hearing from you.